What's up, YouTube? It's your boy again, coming back to another video on this channel. As always, I am the Rhino, and today we got a guest on the show. I'm super excited about today because we have Professor Liu. Professor Liu is an assistant professor of management at Santa Clara University, Libya School of Business, where, no surprise, I'm getting my MBA. She received her PhD in strategic management from the Ohio State University. Dr. Liu's research focuses on firm adaptation to technological changes and resource redevelopment under uncertain circumstances with a focus on strategic interactions. She's particularly interested in electrical utilities transition towards renewable energies in the U.S. electrical power industry. She's also a member of the Academy of Management and Strategic Management Society. Prior to her doctoral studies, Dr. Liu worked as a case writer at the Case Development Center in China Europe International Business School. Professor Liu, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
So first things first is, how did you end up into business?
Yeah, this is a really good question. It helps me to, reflect on the past. And so I grew up in China back in like 1980s and 1990s. The Chinese economy gained a lot of momentum growing because the policies, the economic reforms and the China opening up policies. So as a young child or a teenager, I personally witnessed how the economy grows so fast because of these policies. And I remember when I was very, very young, like maybe 6 or 7 years old, my family, my parents got the tickets. Basically, those tickets, you're only allowed to buy a certain amount of like food or supplies,
Oh, it's kind of like a ration card or a ration card.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but when the economy, on a fast track growing, and I see people's lives, significantly improved, and I just get so fascinated about the economy. And in the meantime, there's a large number of multinational companies, entering Chinese market, and those companies, they brought in a lot of like technologies and job openings.
Right.
And people who work for those multinational companies also make really a lot of money, make their lives really nice, comfortable. So all those things I believe has a big impact on me. So when I applied to college, and I think it's obvious choice that I wanted to get into business school. I think the very regional thinking motivations behind it, probably what's going on in the macro environment, and I got so interested in business because I think that's the companies, large corporation, was the driving force behind the fast growth of the Chinese economy.
Cool. Yeah. Moving from that, like as you mentioned, you were kind of fascinated more, or as I said, you were more fascinated with the strategic management side of everything. So how did you end up picking strategic management over, just say, like marketing or finance or insert other business type here?
Yeah. So we can like unpack the question from 2 layers. The first is about, we have a very, large management department, right? So it's about management over finance, accounting, or, operation. And under the umbrella of management, we also have different domains like, strategic management is one. We also have human resource management, international business entrepreneurship, organization behavior, and so forth. So I will just briefly talk about these 2 layers. So I think, when I didn't, or, when we talk about, for me, my preference of, management over other, fields, for my personal interest, when I was, applied to college or later on, I was very fascinated about, or I was very interested in knowing knowledge or learning skills needed for running a business instead of just focus on one specific like function or activity, right? So if you major in finance or accounting, probably all you care about is this one specific activity, right, or function. But if you learn like strategy or management in general, you are going to learn all kinds of skills, needed for running a business. So that's, I think, is why originally, driving me to pick business as my major instead of other areas. Regarding strategic management, so once I got into when I was in grad school in Shanghai, um, it's I still have no preference or no difference regarding like the different domains in the management department. So in the first year, all the students in the management department, we had a chance to pick our advisors. So I just picked the one who's very famous in the strategic domain, and she's basically give me a lot of access to like English literature in strategic management. So this is the one I didn't choose by myself. It's just my advisor. She's she's expert in this area. That's why I'm just very naturally follow her lead to get into this domain. But once I start to learn knowledge and read papers in strategic management, it's very similar to what we talk about path dependence theory, past dependence. So the more you devote your effort in one area, you're more motivated or you're more interested in this specific path. So that's what happened to me once I started reading more literatures in strategic strategy. It just become so fascinating to me. There's so many interesting questions in strategy, So fundamentally, we wanted to understand why firms are different, right? The heterogeneous firms, just exactly like what's happening in the real business world, or just you and me, right? We individuals, there's so many differences among us. I really wanted to understand why some firms perform better than others, right? And also we can know a lot about their decision making process. How can they make the right decisions, or under which conditions they will make this decision or that. So just then this why I was drawn to this area.
That's cool. So kind of just to sum it up, you didn't choose strategy management chose you.
Well, both way, I think. I can go both way.
So with that kind of being said, I know, like you said, you went to school in China, raised up under, I don't want to say a pure communist regime or government, but a communist majority, to say a minimum. But my question is, how does strategy differ from like the communist leaning or majority governmental system compared to like a socialist system compared to like a capitalist system here in the United States?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So when in strategy literature, or when we study the firm heterogeneity, there's different buckets, factors we can study or to explain why firms differ, right? And one bucket is relates to the very broad macro environment. We learn about pestle analysis, the 6 forces like political, legal, economic, technological, so forth. Right. I think one big factor here we can talk about is the political or legal, right, force. Right. So as you can see, these two environments are drastically different regarding the government or political system. So I think firms definitely need to act differently in response to different environment, different political system. So right. If for example, just hypothetically speaking, if there's a lot of regulations or rules, right? Like for example, in patent, when you apply the patent or there are different rules, then you have to care more about the political factors in the environment where there's more stringent policies. But here in the U.S., I think the policy is more less risky or less uncertain. So this is what I can see the difference is the most drastic difference between these two. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Kind of moving forward is that obviously up until 2 years ago, 2019, before the pandemic, we kind of expected something like 2020 to happen, but we didn't know when, how, or where that's going to happen. So, kind of going back to pre 2020, how did strategy change going into the pandemic and now coming out, or I won't say coming out, but going through the pandemic into coming out of the pandemic?
Mm. So yeah, this is a hard question because no one really knows, like you mentioned 2 years ago, what things will happen, right? And so I think I want to talk about two things here. The first one, even though this time is a pandemic, right? But those crises, we actually experienced, companies actually had experience before, like encounter crisis they never anticipated before. And from a more general theoretical perspective, there's no new thing under the sun, right? Just in different format, right? Whatever has happened, it happened before.
Right.
Whatever has been done will be done again. So pandemic, even though this time is new, but decades ago or centuries ago, similar things happened, and firms also need to take actions, right? So this is one. The second is regarding how to react. When there's like a downturn, economically speaking or politically speaking, that's for sure a big hit to the firms in daily routine or their future or strategy execution. That's for sure. And the influence is pretty much equal to all industries or all the firms, right? Very few industry probably will, gain exceptionally well, doing exceptionally well in this period of time. But generally speaking, most industry got hit, pretty much equally, right? So I think just confronting the crisis, the firm probably will do something just to maintain the minimum expenditure or just keep efficiency level high. So we see so many companies have already done so. They just make the cost low, right, to sustain or sustain the operation of the company, keep it running, and waiting for when things get better, they can regain the momentum to back on the right track again. But in the meantime, we can also think about how firms they can prepare right ahead of time, even though pandemic no one will anticipate, but the firms probably can do something to like put aside some resources to help them get through this very difficult period of time, right? And some companies, they even expand their growth. I think one of the company, one of our team study Lego during the pandemic, they even expand their presence, right? Expanding into other countries like APEC countries, So because they have really healthy cash flow in the back, in the past, and also they probably put aside some resources, not just help them, go through the very difficult period of time, but also allow them to expand, during the difficult period of time. And so a challenge can also be seen as opportunity. So I think, this is something I can think about at this point. What do you think? What's your observation?
My thing is that, like you mentioned, going into the pandemic, 2019 into 2020, people were confident that this pandemic won't happen or won't be, I don't want to say that big of a deal, but obviously it turned out to be like King Kong going through Tokyo kind of a thing where it just destroyed everything, decimated everybody. And unfortunately, a lot of people have died during the pandemic, and people kind of realized, oh, I don't want to, life is short, and I would rather work for a company that pays me well and kind of like go off that way, if that makes any sense. And where it's like, I want to be able to change the world and have a meaningful life and not be working a 9 to 5 job, and companies even like want to are kind of like realizing like, oh God, our employees are our most valuable asset to us, regardless if it's here in the
Yeah.
United States or in China or in Ireland or wherever. And it's like we have to treat them correctly, because I know, at least I know Amazon has been under the microscope for a very long time about how workers and their employees are mistreated and underpaid and all that stuff. So it's kind of like, it's interesting to see a
Yeah. I
real life
think, yeah.
application. Yeah.
Yeah, you actually raised a really good point. We're talking about the power change, during, before, after pandemic. We see that pandemic actually, gave employees more power negotiating, right, with their employer or their boss. That's, this is really nice angle. You see this. Yeah, it's very interesting. We can see the power dynamics,
Yeah.
change during this
And
period of time. Yeah.
yeah, and obviously that led to the I was going to say Great Recession, but a Great Resignation that's currently going on, where it's like people are saying like, hey, I would rather do my own thing and be happy and get like X amount of money more than working for a company from 9 to 5 than anything else. So it's interesting to see how corporate strategy has changed, along with the power dynamic shifting more towards the employees than the business owners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, yeah, I haven't thought about this, but you're absolutely right. This is also what's going on here, right in here in the Bay Area. We have the shortage labor, and there's raise, in employees paycheck. They ask for raise, and absolutely right. Yeah, this is another things um, going on. I mean, I think the labor maybe. Um, Expert, human resource expert will probably offer more insights in these areas. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
good point. Yeah,
it's interesting too, because like for those of you watching, listening to this on YouTube or wherever podcasts are sold, I work in construction as an engineer, and I was overhearing a couple of my coworkers who were laborers, and they were making as much money as I was as laborer, and I had an engineering degree. I was like, why did I go through engineering school when I can do this? So I was like, it's interesting to see that, like, that kind of dichotomy or dynamic too.
hmm yeah. But I think in the meantime, I think everyone need to keep a long term, view
Yeah.
about what's going on. Maybe in the short term we can gain, maybe raise or increase our revenue or income, whatever. But how long this can be sustained, right? And we have to think about keep it a long term view. And sometimes we learn this from in the past or the cases. People may do things that's maximize their short term benefits, but unfortunately may harm or jeopardize a long-term return, right? And but if you only keep the short-term view, you wouldn't see this, and you think, oh, we're making great progress, without seeing the consequence in the long run, which can also be dangerous.
Right. So with that being said, how do you think business has changed, kind of, or will change and be shaped in the future?
Yeah. Um, so so from like the more like the overarching level, if I just use theory to see everything, we see a lot of similarities what's happening now today and also what happened in the past. So we can learn a lot of lessons from the past actually. Like for example, now we have a lot of new technologies. Also we have crisis now, but like decades ago, centuries ago, companies also have crisis challenges. Like we think about decades ago, people rode horses. When the car was introduced, no one really believed this thing will work, right? And people so scared of it, and so like reluctant to get on board, adopting this machine. But now cars are really popular. Basically everyone is just our daily life, part of daily life, and also the new technologies now. And so we're kind of in a, even though we're talking about specifics, right? It might be different, but if we think about, the mechanism or the theory behind it is pretty much the same, right? So, but when we talk about very specific force or factors that may drive, or reshape the future of companies. I think there's like in the new technology, particularly as the driving force. I will say, like, for example, recently we talked a lot about machine learning, right? Artificial intelligence will definitely for sure change a lot of industries in the future, right? And maybe some tasks can be performed by robots instead of human beings, right? And because of the big data, right, we can have a pattern and uh, program them to perform some task. But another very important issue I want to point out here is the climate change, right? It will have the profounding impact on how business will be in future, right? And I recently watched a lot of shows, animal shows, and you see how the environment has been, damaged, for a long time. It's kind of like, we're at a very critical point. We need to do something to make a change. A lot of actually VC companies, they already, shift their focus to more environmental friendly technologies or businesses. I think that's another very important trend we should keep an eye on.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that business had a connection to affecting our environment that much.
Oh,
So
absolutely, yeah.
yeah, so that's interesting for me to understand and realize. Oh, okay, here we are.
Yeah.
So kind of moving into that, like talking about the environment and all that stuff. So I'm gonna kind of break this question up into two parts. How does a mature company like Apple or Microsoft, or I guess even a Tesla, make the right decisions without having all the information? And the second part to that is I'm gonna scale it down to like, how does a startup do the same thing?
Yeah. When we talk about these two firms, if the environment is highly uncertain, I think it doesn't matter if you're mature, well-established firms, or if you are a startup, because the environment basically the same. The risk, it's not just risk, it's uncertainty is very high. So no one really has all the knowledge, to predict or to make a reasonable prediction about the future. So in this scenario, it doesn't matter if you're big companies or small companies. You have to you're in the same boat, right? So in those scenarios, it's extremely hard. In theory, in strategy literature, we talk a lot about luck is one of the factor that will, or plays a very important role determining firm performance. And so we have to acknowledge that sometimes it's just pure luck, right? It just, like we talk about Samsung, they're able, when there's competing standards, the semiconductor, and Samsung was partially, it's lucky they were able to make the right bet, and to choose the right technology, so they will get ahead of get a advantage over other firms. So in those highly uncertain environment, it's extremely hard. But in those environments, we also still can rely on collecting information and to upgrade our beliefs. I also have a paper on in this area. So basically, to study how firms can update their beliefs about the future using Bayesian updating mechanism. So as you collect more information, particularly when it's a highly uncertain environment, competitors' action will reveal some information to you. So basically, everyone just observe each other's behavior, collect information from the outside environment, and upgrade their beliefs about the future. And I don't think it's there's the right time for a company to make a move. It all depends on if you have enough knowledge, and also depends on the firm's risk, their attitude towards uncertainty or risk, right? So it's very hard. I will say in these scenarios, no one has advantage. Everyone has to try and err or be cautious, yeah, as they are more confident, after collect a certain amount of data or information, then maybe some firms are more comfortable making a decision, make a move, and
Okay.
yeah, that I think that's pretty much what's happening now here in the autonomous cars area, right? No one really knows for sure what's going to happen, but all firms had to, involve or participate in, the invention or development of this new technology. So
Cool.
everyone's on, on the, the same, they're on the same, level played, air ground. So no one really has advantage over other.
Okay.
What do you think? Yeah, Narinjo.
I mean, I think it's gonna be a little bit harder for like a startup to make bigger changes than Tesla or an Apple, or I guess even like a Boeing or Lockheed or someone like that, where it's like mainly because in a startup you have to stretch every cent. You make to quote Tupac, you make $1 out of 15 cents, and it's very true because you don't have that much money coming in. You have to figure out, all right, if I spend $5 on this one item, what can I get like the most ROI or rate of return on investment on from here? So it's it's interesting. Like something like a Tesla, on the other hand, you can like they can literally burn $2 or $3 million and say, okay, that failed. Let's try to do this again with this product here.
So actually, you're talking about two different things. I think for the startup, you're talking about there's like shortage of resources, particular capital resources, right? And so that's why they probably cannot spend money, enough abundant capital resources for them to spend on R&D or just invention of new technology. This is for sure is true. And I think these days what is really most valuable is not money, because it's the new idea, it's the good idea, right? So if you have a good idea, there's always like a lot of VCs or investors waiting for you, willing to bet on you, giving you resources. So this is one. And for the large companies, even though they have a lot of resources, but they might also has a weakness in those talents in inventing new technologies. So we see Apple, even though it's has a lot of resources, but maybe people working for Apple, they already, some of them may get used to the large companies culture. They're very comfortable working environment, and maybe they're not that sharp or sensing the most promising new technology in the future. It's usually it's the startup usually has more talents inventing new technology. So it's kind of both has pros and cons. One maybe very has this strengths, but also has disadvantage in some other area.
Right. That makes sense. So I guess my last question I can think of right now is, if you met someone who wants to go into strategic management, kind of like follow your path or something similar to your path, what advice would you give this person?
Yeah, so there's two different kinds of responsibilities, working in academia. Someone like me, one is it's about teaching. The other one is doing research. For the teaching part, it's more like, we have to broadcast knowledge, right, to our audience, which are students. Yeah. And I will say, this is also what I learned over the years. It's very important that, you just genuinely care about students. I think it's very important, so it's not just about one way giving or broadcasting knowledge. It can be, mutual, understanding, knowing students really well, care about what they think, is also beneficial for faculty members to broadcast knowledge among students. Yeah. And regarding research, I think, this part is about creating new knowledge, right? It's not just about broadcasting existing knowledge, it's about creating new knowledge. I think everyone who graduated from the PhD program they are well trained with all kinds, skills and techniques, and to, fulfill this task, creating new knowledge. So I wouldn't comment too much on that. Just working hard, maybe talk to peers, colleagues, about new ideas.
Cool. I mean, you kind of brought this up, but like my question is, what do you mean? Like, what kind of research are you conducting in the strategic management world?
For me, or just in general?
Let's try. Let's go with both.
So, if it's in general, I will say that, strategy, there's a few, fundamental questions in strategy to, research. One is we study why firms differ, like study how to explain the performance differences among firms, the heterogeneity of in firm performance. The second, we study how firms behave. Basically, it's about, the firm's decision-making process, like how they make decisions in different scenarios, right? And the theories scholars use to explain either it's firm performance differences or the decision-making process actually has, constantly evolve over time. Like 30, 40 years ago, for example, we have this structured Porter's, industry structure analysis, 5 or 6 forces, right? And these days, scholars develop new theoretical angles. For example, we can use like ecosystem to explain, right, what's going on in the traditionally, defined industry or multiple industry connected industries. So those are very interesting area. And for me, I particularly interested in the decision making domain. I study particularly how firms making decisions when they're faced a highly uncertain environment. And the one empirical context I study is the renewable energies adaptation to utilities, electric utilities adaptation of renewable energies. Yeah, this is one of my research area.
Cool. Yeah. That's interesting. So with that being said, I guess we will end the podcast here. So
thank you so much.
So Professor Liu, thank you for being on the show. For those of you watching or listening to us on wherever podcasts are sold, you can find us on YouTube at Rhino and the Bet Podcast. You find out if you're watching us on YouTube, you can find us wherever podcasts are sold. For both people who are watching and listening, find us on Instagram at Rhino and the Bet Podcast. You can find us on Facebook under the same name. If you're watching this on YouTube, all the links will be in the description box down below, so you can check us out. But as always, have a good one. See you in the next episode. Peace.